So what we're looking at here is a bunch of errors that say that we've got issues with our content security policy because we've only allowed things to come from the same domain. So anything that's coming from a different domain is going to be flagged as unsafe, but we're in report only, so it doesn't affect our application just now. But what happens if we're not in report only? Supposing we use CSP directly. What happens then? And just make sure our application restarts itself. And if we go back to our browser and we refresh the page, well, we don't get anything. And we get errors in our console telling us that we've violated policies, but this is the effect of our content security policy. And we're not allowed to see our application because we're violating these policies. So that's the effect of what we're doing here. But we'll go back to report only because we want to see the full information of what we need to fix to get our application working. So we'll just make sure that after our app has restarted, we can see our application, just so I can point out the things that we need to correct. So first of all, we've got a report telling us that it's refused to load the style sheets from fonts.googleapis.com. And what we need to do is allow this because we want the style sheets coming from Google APIs to be loaded, and we trust this source of where we're getting this from. So what we can do is we can come back into VS Code, and in our style sources after self, what we can do is add a period and chain on custom sources, and then just paste in https fonts.googleapis.com. And once our application has restarted, what we should find is that this now disappears from the report because we've specifically allowed it. So let's just refresh the page. And indeed, that has gone. Let's take a look at the images next. Now we've got our images coming from Cloudinary. We're okay with that. So once again, I'm just going to copy the URL that is highlighted, if I can get it into my clipboard. And we just need the first part, the domain it's coming from, res.cloudinary.com. So what we'll do, we'll head back to VS Code, and this was for our image sources. So what we'll do, we'll use the same thing. We'll say custom sources, open parentheses, and then paste in the URL. And I've got an extra quote mark in there. So once again, once our application has restarted, we should see those warnings disappear from our console. So let's just go back and refresh the page. And we're down to less warnings. Now what we've also got in our application is an inline script somewhere. And in order to run inline scripts, they have to be specifically allowed. Now, the content security policy itself will generate a hash to say this is what the inline script is, but this is a hashed version of that script. And what we can use is this hash and say that this is allowed in our application as well. So just copy this into the clipboard, and once again we'll go back to VS Code, and for our script sources what we'll do is we'll say custom source, and once again we'll just paste in what we got in our clipboard there. Now obviously this will be a different hash for yourself, so do make sure you copy and paste in exactly what we're looking at here, and then we can go ahead and refresh our page once again. And now we're down to a few different options. Now one of these I don't believe, because we've added a custom source for this hash, and we see this 3 times inside here. Now whether or not this is due to we're using .NET 5 and the package is for .NET 3, I'm not entirely sure, but we'll ignore it for now and then see what happens after we switch this from report only to using just CSP. So what we've also got is 16 things saying about our fonts violate the CSP font source, and what we need to do is say that we want fonts.gstatic.com to be a custom source as well. So once again I'll just copy this into the clipboard. We'll go back, and for our font sources we'll say custom sources, and then we'll paste in https fonts.gstatic.com and make sure this is correct. And once again we'll just go back and see how we're getting on now. And let's refresh the page. And we're down to 8 inside there, so there must be another source, and we've got data application fonts as well. So what we'll also do is we'll just say data : is also okay, and go back to VS Code, and for our fonts, we'll add a comma, and then we'll just specify data and colon to say that this is okay, and then we can go back once again, and now we'll see how we're doing. And I'll just refresh the page, and now we're down to these three, and this hash is the same as we've already specified in our content security policy. And if I just copy this into my clipboard just to make absolutely sure, and if I just paste this in below just to compare, then this looks identical to what we have there. So I'm going to say I don't believe it, and I'm going to ignore it, which sounds like a terrible thing to do, but remember this is report only, and what we should be able to do now is go back to use CSP, and then we'll see if we get any errors in our application. So what I'll do, just to make doubly sure, I'm just going to stop the application and then restart .NET Watch Run. And let's go take a look. So I'll just refresh the page. Do we get any warnings? Do we get any errors? Can we click around? Does our application still work? And I'm going to say yes, it does. If we take a look actually at the headers that we're returning now, so I'll just refresh the page and go to Network, and let's take a look at one of our responses from the server. And what we should be able to see in the response headers, let's move this up, is all of our different policies that we're adding now. The content security policy, what's allowed to run on our application. If anybody managed to inject some JavaScript in line into our index.html, it is not going to run because it's not allowed because of this policy. And then we've got our X content type options, our X frame options, and our cross-site scripting protection, all enabled. And there's just one more header that we need to add to this, and that's for strict transport security. So we'll head back to VS Code, and what we'll do, this is something that we only want to enable in production because browsers will cache this information. So what we'll do, after env is development, we know that we're not in development mode, we're in production. And theoretically, at least, what we should be able to do is just say app use HSTS. And that should be all we need to do. But try as I might, I cannot get this to work with Heroku. But this will not defeat us, because what we can do instead is create our own little piece of middleware to add the header manually onto this. So what we'll do is we'll say app.use, and then we'll say async, and we can get access to the context and the next method to invoke the next piece of middleware. And then we can add an arrow, and inside here what we'll do is we'll say context.response.headers, and then we'll say adds, and what we'll do is we'll just manually type in the strict transport security header so it gets added into our responses. So we'll say strict-transport-security, and all we'll do, we'll just give this a max age. So we'll say max-age, and we'll set this equal to, and the recommended value for this is 1 year. So what we'll do, we'll say 315.36000 to represent 1 year. And then we can say await next, and we can call the invoke method to call the next piece of middleware after we've added our header. So with this in place, what we should be able to do now is redeploy our application to Heroku with these updated headers, and then we'll be able to check out our security report once again. So what we'll do is we'll just stop our application from running, and we'll cd up to the reactivities folder level. And what we need to do is say git add followed by a period to add our changes or stage our changes, and then we need to create a new commit. So we'll say git commit -m, and we'll just say security headers added. And then what we can do is we can redeploy our app to Heroku. So what we'll do is we'll say git push Heroku main and press return. And what this should do is go ahead and redeploy our application with our updated code to Heroku. So once again, I'll pause the video and come back once this has completed. And once this is done, what we can do now is go test. And we'll head back to, first of all, our React app. There's no point in adding security if our app is broken. That would seriously defeat the purpose. So we'll just refresh this page and make sure our application is still functional. And we can see our activities loaded. We can click on the filters and we can make sure our routes are still working. And this looks fine. But what we want to see, if we just copy our URL and go back to securityheaders.com, we want to see more Hall of Fame than Hall of Shame, of course. So let's paste in our URL and click on scan. And boom, now we get an A grade on securityheaders.com. Now we didn't add a permissions policy. This one is still very new and it's not supported by all browsers, and the package we're using doesn't have this policy that we can just go ahead and add. So I'm not worried about that, and Twitter and Facebook also don't worry about this either. So if they're not worried, I'm not worried. And we get a great grade, so we can sleep comfortably at night knowing our application is safe. Obviously, local storage still presents a weakness for our token in one aspect, and that's if somebody leaves their laptop in a coffee shop logged in to our application. They will be able to access the token from there. But like I said before, the user is the weak link in any security system. If a user left their ATM card in the same coffee shop with their PIN number written on the back, the bank would not have much sympathy for them if somebody picked it up and used it to withdraw cash from a cash machine. So this brings us to the end of the main part of this course. We have our application and it is now deployed securely, or securely enough, on the internet. So what we're going to do now is we'll wrap up with an end of course summary, but there is some bonus content that follows that.